We have our recurring guest, Ms. Luz Lopez, again on the show. Can you tell us? There's a lot of stuff I wanted to ask you, but we have limited time. What has been the latest cases that have been brought before the Southern Poverty Law Center?
So we at Southern Poverty Law Center do not engage in direct representation of immigrants any longer. However, we are working our way through cases that we previously had, and we keep apprised of current immigration happenings in terms of the current immigration landscape across the United States. We have seen that a few initiatives from this new administration that are consistent with their anti immigrant views and with their desire to deport or remove as many people, both undocumented and documented, as possible. So quickly, we know that there was a recent EO issued that required persons who are in the U.S., without papers, without permission, to register to a web. It's like a website. It's almost like an application that the Department of Homeland Security has created. And the purpose of this application, the Department of Homeland Security says, is to, keep the government aware of where people are, so that, they can be able to reach out to folks, and also to allow people to sign up for something, in the hopes that in the future there will be some type of action to regularize folks, to, I don't want to say amnesty, but that's what the Department of Homeland Security is putting forth. We know that this is not true, that the purpose of this application that is encouraging, and more than encouraging, it's threatening people who are here without any papers, who are here undocumented, to register onto this app and to give away their address, their location, and other information that is personal to them. The purpose is to make removal easier. This administration has never discussed a potential amnesty or a potential push for regularizing immigrants who are here without permission. So, what they think will happen is that a lot of folks will fall for the trick. They'll sign up, and then they will be pretty much sitting ducks for ICE, for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the branch of the government that is responsible for removing people for apprehending persons and removing them. So that's an interesting development that has happened over the last month or so. Another interesting development with this case, this week there was a student from the very prestigious university, Columbia University in New York City. This young man came on a student visa. He married a U.S. citizen and became a lawful permanent resident, what we call LPR, right? And many of us have family members who are lawful permanent residents, who are here, and waiting, biding their time so they can apply for citizenship. Well, this young man, who is Palestinian, was involved in peaceful demonstrations. They were peaceful demonstrations against the Israeli um, invasion of Palestine post October 7th, and the ongoing atrocities, that the Israeli army is committing there against civilians. So this young man led a group of protesters over a sustained period of time at Columbia University. So what has happened is about, I would say 3 weeks ago, there was an executive order that the president issued, stating that any type of quote unquote anti Semitic activity on college campuses would be punished severely. And the EO is very scary because it sets out pretty much um, a means by which universities are, urged to collaborate with different government agencies, including immigration, ICE, DHS, so that they can identify people whom they consider engaging in anti Semitic activities. Many of these people, according to the EO, are going to be students on visas, immigrants. And these folks will be, according to this executive order, the EO, as we call it, be subject for deportation, for removal, because they're engaging in these, protests. So this EO is very dangerous because it will allow those schools who are willing to participate in collaborating with the government to identify students, not just, students who are here on visas, but like Mr. Khalil, who are lawful permanent residents, or perhaps even, who are U.S. naturalized citizens, as potentially engaging in anti-Semitic behavior, therefore opening up the possibility of removal from the United States. And if you're thinking, this sounds like we're living in, communist Russia or in China or North Korea, you would be right. This is, from all accounts, I've reviewed the EO myself. This is the first time, that I've ever lived in this country. I'm an immigrant. The first time that I've ever lived in this country where I actually fear for people who are exercising their right to free speech, because the EO does not only talk about quote unquote violent conduct, right? It talks about free speech, about, protesting peacefully, about speaking out. And those particular actions, to speak out peacefully, to protest, to engage in peaceful protest, those are protected by the United States Constitution's First Amendment, right to free speech. So this is a very, very concerning development that not only will affect immigrants, people who are students on visas, lawful permanent residents, but has the potential of affecting all of us, who may have children in school, who may be students ourselves who are born here. So please, please keep an eye on this and make sure that you reach out to your representatives in Congress, in the federal government, to speak out against this anti free speech law.
And we can talk more about that in our next segment. But are you familiar with the January 20th, 2025 presidential executive order called Protecting the American People Against Invasion?
Am I familiar with it? Yes, I have heard. Yes.
So it makes that very prejudicial, almost racist conspiracy theory
Mm-hmm.
like label and puts that out there. And then when you read it, it just says that it's trying to enforce laws that are already there. So what has been your interpretation of that executive order?
So, what's happening with these executive orders is that in very few occasions will they actually, present new, um, new, how should I say it, actions. I don't want to confuse people. An executive order is not a law, but it's an interpretation usually of existing laws. In this country, you cannot create immigration policy or law via executive order. The president has some authority to create regulation or certain policy via executive order, but it is the Congress that has, the responsibility to enact laws related to, immigration, and the president carries out those laws, right? So we have not had the Congress make any new laws that, restrict existing laws. What's happening is that the current administration, via executive order, is taking a very narrow, very strict interpretation of existing laws and coupling that with their, promise to those who voted for them that they will remove as many people as possible, because in their, you know in their rhetoric, immigrants, and people will say that's not true, Luz, but it is true. The people who voted these folks into power, they believe that immigrants, are equivalent to crime, to high unemployment, to a drain on the resources of the United States. And, the social media has helped in, propagating that particular view, because, they show a lot of folks. And of course, this is, I think, that was part of the strategy to, portray, immigrants, recent arrivals, as people who are getting free housing and free, food and opportunities that U.S. born people or people who are here legally do not have. This was all a strategy to upset people, because in fact, most undocumented persons and most immigrants do not qualify for programs like SNAP, food assistance, housing. There are some refugee programs that provide assistance for short periods of time, but most immigrants are not benefiting from federal assistance. But there was a very good strategy to make it seem like that. So, with respect to the executive order, what they're doing is, they have people upset, and people who elected these folks want as many persons removed from this country whom they perceive as, immigrants or not rightfully here. So what we've seen thus far is that, these folks are not talking about all immigrants. They're not talking about Eastern European immigrants. They're not talking about Western European immigrants. They're talking about people who tend to be Black or brown. And at this point, even though the administration ran on this platform of removing undocumented criminals, and people who were here doing quote unquote bad things, the raids that have been ongoing since pretty much the first day that this, president assumed power, uh, have involved the sweeping up of U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents. So the communities that elected these people, they're happy because that they don't care if a brown person is documented or not. That's how they view immigration. But what's happening in some immigrant communities is the realization that these new executive orders, that talk about removing criminals and restoring the U.S. to its, former glory. Yeah, they're talking about us people. They're talking about Latinos. They're talking about folks who are brown, who are Black, and other communities will likely be affected soon because it's always a slippery slope. And we know cases where, in raids, they've swept up lawful permanent residents, like your tío, or perhaps your dad. They've swept up, folks who are U.S. citizens, like, it could be, your mom, or your auntie. They are sweeping people up in these, wide cast nets who are here lawfully. So what does that, say to us? They don't care. They're going after people who look a certain way, who represent a certain, a certain class of folks that a lot of the people who voted, a lot of the white supremacists, the white nationalists who voted for this current president, they want that to happen regardless of immigration status.
And Ms. Luz, one example that proves what we're saying as being racist is that remember when he attacked the Haitian community? Are they like in Michigan or Minnesota? And then
Ohio.
in
Yeah.
Ohio, and then now there he actually um, like declined to renew their TPS status. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
You are correct. Not just the Haitians, Mr. David, but also Syrians and Afghani people have unfortunately suffered, and the Ukrainians too.
So, do you see a Muslim ban coming back? Because I thought it was pretty egregious that Steve Bannon, when he was, you know, part of the cabinet of Trump, he was pushing a lot of anti-Muslim and anti-Middle Eastern policies. Do you see that coming back, even though Bannon is not an official member of the cabinet?
Oh, sure. There was some article this morning about the Muslim ban 2.0. It is coming if it's not here already. The article that I saw talked about, using again, the what's going on, the genocide in Gaza and in Palestine, and um, the false narratives around that, right? These are terrorists who are causing all of this pain when in fact that is not true, but using that as an excuse to ban people from certain countries from coming to the US. And I will tell you one thing. The Muslim ban is probably going to be announced very soon. um, I would not be surprised if following the announcement of a ban of people from certain countries in the Middle East, that there is a ban from people from certain countries in Latin America that is forthcoming. We're already seeing retaliation against Canadians, of all people, right? Canadians. But I believe that this particular administration will go beyond banning people from Middle Eastern countries, from certain Middle Eastern countries, not, of course, Saudi Arabia, because they give a lot of money to the Trump family. But I would guess that there will be certain countries that will be targeted for either straight out bans, or for very restrictive travel access to the US. And, I'm thinking specifically of countries like Nicaragua, or, we obviously have a ban with Cuba, right? But and with Venezuela, that another country where the TPS extension was reversed. So Venezuelans now are in deep, deep trouble. But yeah, they'll pick certain countries in Latino America, and I'm very worried about that too.
And just to remind our audience, it wasn't only Middle Eastern and Muslim folks that were being banned. It was also African countries that Trump had
Mhm.
deemed as worthless, or he used worse than that. But it's interesting that you said that usually Europeans are not affected by this, but now Ukraine is being used as a pawn, just like Venezuela was being used by both the Trump and the Biden administration. Now the Ukrainians are also paying for this new love of Russia and
Mhm.
trying to work with them. Correct?
That is correct. And I wouldn't say new love, because as you know, and probably your audience knows, that there are strong ties, and evidence of strong ties between Russia, the Russian regime, and Trump that go back to the 80s. In fact, there were articles circulated that he is in, he is or he was allegedly a Russian operative whose name is Krasnov. So those articles that are alleging that, I found that to be very interesting. So yes, we're talking about some, you know, very strong support from this administration toward Russia, which may date back to, for decades.
We disagree with the idea of him being an operative, but I can see him being a financial like backer of the oligarchs, so the oligarchs financially
Mhm.
backing him, and then he has so many deals in business entanglements that he hasn't broken off while being president. That is very disturbing, and I
Mhm.
don't know why people didn't see that, during the last administration. I know you have limited time for this segment. Um, when you say that your organization no longer is involved in immigration cases, was what was the rationale for them taking a step back for that, and what other agencies do you recommend for people who are struggling with this kind of stuff?
Other than what the executive director of my organization mentioned, that really is all I can, go by. And what she mentioned was that providing direct representation to immigrants in the Deep South uh, was um, a challenge for us because of the need that was, so strong, and that we would be focusing more on providing immigrants with, um, assistance on what we would call a high impact level. So instead of doing direct representation, um, she mentioned that we were shifting toward only providing support via what we would call, like, for perhaps class litigation, et cetera. So that's really all I have to say about that. I'm not really aware of what, other than what she stated were the causes behind SPLC shutting down, the CFI offices that it had in Georgia and Louisiana. But what I can tell you is there are other organizations that are stepping up. They're on a scale, more local, more state level type of scale. Like, for example, in Louisiana, you have ISLA, which is an immigrant rights organization that provides direct representation. And in Georgia, you have, I believe that there are organizations like Asian Americans for Advancing Justice. There's local ACLU advocates, as well as pro bono or low bono law firms that are still providing access to immigration representation at the individual level. But there is a need. Of course, we would love to have in the Deep South organizations that are entrenched in doing this work, like there are in Texas. Where there are numerous organizations, but we haven't really built that out, that type of network out yet in the Deep South. That's why the loss of, CFI, the, SPLC's Southeast Immigrant Freedom Initiative, which provided direct representation, it was such a huge loss, because there is such, there's very few options. But unfortunately, I'm gonna have to say goodbye, and I would love for us to maybe have a part two of this conversation soon.
Definitely, we thank you again for your time and for the work that you do in the out in the community.
I thank you, David, for being such a voice, for the people. You take good care, and it's a pleasure as always. Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye.